Hello, friends, and welcome to the May 5th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and to help you engage with the Texas legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we're recording with just over 3 weeks remaining in the legislative session and key House deadlines next week. For me, many of the more emotional moments of the legislative session have centered on hearing the stories and reflections of victims of gun violence, including many from Uvalde parents. Gun control advocates have spent countless hours telling their stories and having productive conversations with legislators. And I'm especially grateful for Texas Impact's Ending Gun Violence legislative team, led by Bobby Watson and several incredible clergy from across Texas. But despite all of that work, and despite a 13-hour hearing, the House committee has so far not even scheduled a vote on priority bills. And you'll hear some of that frustration in today's conversation as we welcome Christina Delgado, Southwest Regional Advocacy Associate with Community Justice Action Fund, and Nicole Golden, Executive Director with Texas Gun Sense. But before we jump into that conversation, I'll once again note that there are just over 3 weeks remaining in the Texas legislative session, and advocates of faith are doing incredible work. But now is crunch time. Our Monday action alerts are still the best place to start, but the rapid response team will be receiving several updates a week from now through sine die as important priorities approach key deadlines. If you feel like you're missing out on opportunities, go to texasimpact.org and click on the Action Center to make sure you are participating fully. If you have questions, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Christina Delgado and Nicole Golden. Joining us for today's conversation are two passionate advocates for sensible gun reform policies in Texas. As we welcome today Christina Delgado, Southwest Regional Advocacy Associate with Community Justice Action Fund, and Nicole Golden, Executive Director with Texas Gun Sense. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Christina, we're going to start with you. It's always important to talk about the why people are advocating for these important issues. And you're certainly a passionate advocate for gun violence reforms. Let's start with allowing you to tell your story. Why'd you choose to get involved?
Well, growing up in Texas, we have our generations of gun owners and, seeing this increase of violence, I would probably say for me, since the first interaction, I guess you could say, was in 1999 when I was a junior in high school and Columbine happened. And I actually had a friend who had moved from Littleton, Colorado, and was going to school alongside, myself and other classmates here in Clear Lake. And it was really astounding to me that an event like that, a massacre, could happen in a school. And throughout my life, I've had friends who have been shot and survived. I lost a friend in 2016. And, now being a mother of two, a spouse, a bonus parent to a now going on 19-year-old. When Parkland happened, it was crazy that something like this could happen in this day and age. And I made the mistake of telling my daughter that things like that don't happen in Texas, because growing up in Texas, we grew up in the times of gun racks and shotguns in the back of pickup trucks. And it was not even a back thought in our minds. And, I told her again on March 24th, when we did the March for Our Lives here in Houston, Texas. That was a nationwide march that was led by March for Our Lives. And I told her again that it wouldn't happen. And unfortunately, May 18th of 2018, here in my town of Santa Fe, I woke up to what I wanted to believe were rumors of an active shooter at Santa Fe High School. And it turned out to be the first Texas mass shooting. And my daughter, who is now a senior at Santa Fe High this year, was a seventh grader when that happened. And lo and behold, we found out that numerous people that we knew lost their children. Two very, very close friends of mine lost their children. London's classmate who rode the bus with her passed away. And our neighbor's niece was Shayna Fisher. And it was in those moments following that, with my first advocacy day that I ever did at the Capitol, to see the total dismissal of grieving parents, just asking for fundamentals of gun safety to be implemented was enraging to me. And it was on May 18th that I made a promise to my daughter that I would do everything in my power to ensure that she and her friends were safe and free from having to run from gunfire in their classrooms. And so that is what has brought me here. And it has really become a part of my heart and soul, and is now, my life's work to make sure that we are implementing gun safety, gun fundamental safety, into our states, our communities, and in our nation. Because as a gun owning family, this is not the way that we're to behave, and this is not how law abiding gun owners are to be regarded. And so, it's just something that is in my heart, and I will do this until God takes me home.
We appreciate that, and are certainly sorry for the losses that you and your family have experienced. We have a similar story, right? You were talking about Littleton, and I also had a high school classmate who had moved from there. And so I remember going through those experiences in 1999 as well. And it is disappointing looking back over the last couple of decades, like how little progress we've made. And certainly we feel that during this legislative session, and we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But you have been doing some incredible advocacy work since you made that decision to commit to this work, and have seen some progress. Talk some about what you've learned during your experiences so far.
It's been such a short journey, and yet it feels like it was so long, just because it's so much happening so quickly in such a short amount of time. And, the one thing that I have definitely learned is how to take that trauma and grief and turn it into fuel and passion, to bring about change and to make sure that we are preventing another family from having to experience in all capacities what we experience as communities and families who are experiencing these acts of violence that are happening increasingly every day throughout our state and through our country. Persistence is key, and staying focused and really staying rooted and grounded in reality of what your expectations are and what can actually be achieved. But with that being said, I do want to make sure that anybody out there who's listening, who is getting into this work or feels like they want to get in this work, or who is in this work and is feeling dismay and feeling defeated, that this is a long distance marathon. It is not a sprint. These are things that right. If we are going to make long lasting change, it takes every single small inch and step in order to really create a foundation that can be solid and really make these changes. And that is a big lesson that I think a lot of us had to learn, myself and fellow advocates and my friends who have lost their children and who have also been in this work, is that we have to celebrate those incremental wins. And, with that being said, again, I'm going to make a small reference to this session with our Uvalde families who have unfortunately joined us in this community of shooting survivors, as well as this community of grieving families, is that we are changing the way our lawmakers function when they are in the legislature. And we are changing the way that people are led to believe this legislature is supposed to work. That is really, really powerful and important. Because without that, we'll never be able to make these changes that need to be made. We'll never be able to create the strategies that are going to continue the work, as our society evolves, our laws evolve, our world evolves. And that is huge. And that right now, I think, is something that all advocates need to recognize, acknowledge, and celebrate, is that we have made movement, and we have forced lawmakers to start stepping into making those right decisions. And I know that likely later on we'll get into the nitty gritty of what's actually going on in the legislature. But that, I think, is a huge win. And we're seeing that happening at the national level as well. Because these survivors and these grieving families are learning how to turn that grief into passion and learning how to turn that into fuel. And they're not standing down, as they should not. They should continue pressing forward, because this is not the way that our forefathers intended for our society to evolve.
Right. Well, speaking of the Texas legislature, and I think you're right in saying this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're certainly seeing that based on how the ledge is responding this legislative session. But Nicole, turning to you, the policy proposals that Texas Gun Sense and different advocacy groups are bringing forward were not radical, right? If you look at polling, the majority of Texans even would consider the policy proposals we're talking about to be very rational. So can you talk through exactly what advocates were asking for this legislative session?
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely right. I mean, I've been involved in this for a decade. And so I have that kind of long view. And I can definitely see that polling has steadily gone up. I mean, 80% of Texas voters support raising the age to 21 for the purchase of semi-automatic rifles, which has been our biggest ask this session, and especially the one important ask for Uvalde families, because if that measure had been in place this time last year, their children and those teachers would still be alive today, which gives me goosebumps every time I say it. 80% of Texas voters know that, regardless of background. Democrats, Republicans, gun owners, and non-gun owners. It's just been steadily high. Also, other measures have high public support. I think in the 80s percent of Texans support background checks on every gun sale. And we don't currently have that measure in place in Texas. There are only background checks. Background checks are only legally required to be run by federally licensed dealers. So if someone goes into a gun store, they're going to have to, or buys from a dealer in some other capacity, they're going to have to go through a background check. But if they initiate a private sale or transfer online, or maybe go to a gun show and purchase a firearm from a collector who's selling, they don't have to go through a background check, and people support that measure. So those are a couple of the measures. You asked what we're working on at the legislature. We're working on those. Those are two of our most important priorities, but not our only ones. And by the way, we've worked on trying to expand background checks for many sessions. And then, of course, this session, raising the age, became a high priority for obvious reasons. We also work to prevent domestic abusers from easily accessing firearms. We work on safe gun storage measures to, stronger requirements for storing your gun safely, but also safe storage education, funding and supporting safe gun storage education, just so that people know why and how they should store a gun safely to prevent unintentional shootings and suicides, mass shootings like Santa Fe, and other preventable tragedies. We also have been working to, and especially I do this work largely with Christina, to secure funding for community violence intervention programs. We do that at the state and local level, asking for our lawmakers at every level of government to invest those funds to prevent gun violence in Black and brown communities who are suffering disproportionately from daily gun violence. And then we have, we work on measures to prevent firearm suicide. That's largely tied to safe gun storage, but there's also other ways we can, promote awareness about the connection between guns and suicide. More than half of the gun deaths in Texas every year are suicides. So those are, I threw a lot of policies at you. Oh, excuse me, I forgot one. Extreme risk protection orders, another policy we file we've worked with lawmakers to file for numerous sessions, which would simply temporarily separate an individual who is making lethal, threats of imminent harm to themselves or others. So again, common sense policies, high public support, have reduced gun violence and suicides in other states, and we need them here too.
I appreciate that, and we're gonna talk about the long term in just a second because, as Christina mentioned, this is a marathon. That said, we're recording this on May 4th, and next week are several key deadlines in the Texas legislature. So I do want to chat for a second about whether or not there's anything that folks can still do between now and the end of session. Is it still possible, even if unlikely, to get votes on some of these priority pieces of legislation? And if so, what can folks do to help with that effort?
Well, you are right. There are some big deadlines coming up. Tuesday, May 8th. Is that right? Tuesday the 8th or Thursday, May 4th?
Tuesday the 8th.
Tuesday the 8th is the deadline for, I feel like I've got that date wrong somehow because I'm looking at it's Thursday, May 4th.
Monday the 8th.
Tuesday.
It's Monday the 8th.
Monday the
8th.
Monday the 8th. I think I got a lot of our big hearings were on Tuesday.
Yes.
So I think Tuesday is burned into my brain.
It is.
Monday the 8th, which is in only a few days from now, is the deadline for committees to vote bills out of their committee. So when we talk about the raise the age legislation to raise the age to 21 to purchase semi-automatic rifles, that bill was heard, it's been 2.5 weeks now in the Community Safety Committee. Christina and I, along with survivors from Uvalde, grieving parents and many other advocates, waited 13 hours to testify for that bill. And it had tons of support. And even the votes on the committee, because we've had a lot of conversations with those committee members, those 13 committee members. It had the votes on the committee, which would be 7, including at least 1 Republican, to pass it out of the committee. And that bill is stalled. So we're coming up on Monday's deadline to have that's the last chance to push it out and get it to the next committee to where it would be scheduled for the House floor. And, that's why we're angry. It really should have already gotten out.
And that
I was going to say, I would probably even clarify what Nicole said. It's not being stalled. It's being blocked. It is being blocked.
You're exactly right,
from
Christina.
having the ability to flow through the process as the process intended it to do by Chairman Guillen. We're just going to have to call it for what it is because there were very specific instructions that were given to these Uvalde families, straight to them, that if they had the amount of votes to be able to pass it out of committee, he would allow that to happen. He has refused to stand by what he said he would do. So I just want to make sure that we are clear about that.
No, you're right.
That it's
and
being
I think
blocked.
we also know, Christina, I'm sorry, excuse me. And we also know that he is working with party leadership to do that. I mean, I think that's the truth of it. And let me say, Texas Gun Sense is a nonpartisan organization. We work with everyone, and we've supported gun safety bills this session, even by Chairman Guillen, that we were happy about, like his straw purchase bill. We hope it makes it. We work with every office, but the truth of the matter is the Republican state leadership, House Speaker Phelan, worked to keep this bill from moving forward. And it is unacceptable. And I really think as we continue to push this information out to the public, I think they're all seeing that. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but part of the change we work to build is not just legislative change, but culture change. And I think part of that culture change is people being appalled that this could be possible.
Yeah, that's the frustration that I keep hearing is you have so many of these advocates who showed up, waited hours and hours and hours to testify, have been having meetings with representatives, and then to not even vote, right? Like that just doesn't seem right.
If for no other reason, it would have felt, and I don't want to speak for survivors, but Christina knows them very well. And I think we've heard this from them. It would have felt like a symbolic act to make some meaning of the trauma they've experienced and the time they have spent coming to the Capitol that they shouldn't have had to do, and the 13 hours of waiting just to speak in honor of their loved ones. It would have signaled that, look, we care enough for the testimony you brought to us, the testimony that made the committee cry. we care enough to put our action behind those tears and our action behind, your words and your loved one's memory to just pass this bill out and just give it a symbolic vote, let it move to the next level and the next place and see where it could go. And they didn't even do that.
Yeah. It really is it really is dehumanizing of the committee and the chairman and leadership to behave this way to these survivors. And Nicole is on point. It is symbolic, but it's also an acknowledgement of not only the fact that they have lost their children, but an acknowledgement that they are seen and heard. And after putting them through that 14 hours, after having to sit and listen to new information that these families had not been informed of, brutal, graphic information. Right. And then to come back on your word as far as what your intention was, is absolutely horrific. And this hits very hard on the Uvalde families. But let me tell you, those of us who have also come before them are feeling that too. Because once you become a part of that community, it's no longer just separate tragedies. We are all unified. We are all connected by this same fundamental grief and trauma. And it's just not right that they are doing that. And it's so dehumanizing to these families in this community.
That's Christina. I completely agree. And I will also say, we work incrementally. We work step by step by step. This vote would have been one of those steps, and it's important. And but look, that doesn't take away from the incremental change that we're building. Nobody is intending to give up. I think people will be back stronger than ever next session. I know we will.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I do think momentum is building, and regardless of outcomes this legislative session, you could certainly feel that in the building and in talking with advocates. So what steps need to take place after session to continue to build that momentum towards the next time the legislature convenes?
I mean, if you don't mind me going first, Christina, I would say, I think we have a lot of community built, coalition work and community-based work that we can continue to do together. Like Christina and I work with the Texas Invest in Us Coalition to advance community violence intervention. So in Texas, we're going to do that, which is extremely important. We can work to secure funding for those initiatives and reduce daily gun violence. We can continue to educate the communities and engage them through presentations, whether it's on safe gun storage or the legislature, or just providing people information. And then we're going to be, we have a strong coalition. I think we're going to keep adding groups to that, keep on meeting, and work to identify some policies to present to legislators to file for the next session that we, after we do a good debrief of the session and kind of look at where the opportunities were and where the challenges are, we know that, we have some ideas, I think, of the policies we can try to work on that might have legs next session, while keeping our big, our key policy priorities always in mind, and just continuing to hammer away at those. Yeah,
that's the fundamental key points, I think, that we will be building on, in between the end of this session into the next session. And I do agree with Nicole. Our coalition is very strong of advocates, of different community organizations. And, during this time, we will definitely be continuing to push for those investments into community organizations, and investments in people and in these survivors who are desperately in need of resources. But, going into a separate coalition of these survivors, they are ready to amp up and get ready to figure out and pinpoint those lawmakers who made it very clear that their priority is not gun safety. Their priority is not preventative measures. Because as we've seen in this last legislative session, as well as the legislative session prior, is that all of these measures that seem to be quote unquote priorities are all reactive. They're on the backside of these acts of violence. And if we intend to save lives, we have to get on the front side of these acts of violence. And so I know that talking with the Uvalde families and Lives Robbed, which was formed directly after the Uvalde massacre, we will be amping up to make sure that we are in communities to talk to those community members about their possible electeds for their next elections, and make sure that they are informed on where these what priorities there are with these candidates. And we'll just hope and pray, as we all do, that in this next 2 years that we do not have to welcome in another community into grieving families. And that's kind of our advocacy plan for the next 2 years. But the work does not stop
right.
in any way, shape, or form. And those electeds that remain in office will continue to apply the pressure, even if it's not a legislative session, to let them know that we are paying attention, that we are present, and that we will be coming into their communities to remind their community members and their constituents how they behaved during this legislative session. And I think that is extremely important, to stay engaged with community members and constituents when it's not a legislative session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Anything else you all would like to leave with our listeners today, or any shameless plugs you'd like to leave us with? Where can folks learn more?
You asked something earlier, Scott. Did we tell you? You asked about how people could get engaged and what they could do. Did we get that information to you?
Let's go ahead and do it now, just in case.
Yeah. It is so important that people stay engaged, and we need everybody, whether those people are teachers, parents, survivors, gun owners. So a lot of people joined us this session. We hope more people join us next session for hearings, even if you're more comfortable just sitting and listening, but maybe you have a personal story to share. Give testimony. You don't have to be an expert. You do not have to be an expert. In fact, it's really best if we have, I think, all the voices. So come join us at the Capitol. Help us set up presentations in your community on these issues, and just talk to your friends directly. I really don't ever want people to underestimate talking in one-on-one or in small groups with friends and family about this issue, which used to feel like a third rail issue nobody wanted to touch, but now people want to engage on it. People are empowered to talk about it. Just know that if you, for example, talk to somebody about whether they're storing their guns safely in their home, you could be saving someone's life with that conversation. So even if you're not a person who goes to the Capitol and does goes to big events, maybe you can just talk privately with folks. Just know it really matters. And then, when we hold events, our big advocacy days during legislative years, please come. We did a big one this year, February 28th. It was amazing. There were like 600 people. So there's just so many ways people can engage. But our website is txgunsense.org, where you can find information and then use that to make a difference in your community.
Christina?
Yeah, and definitely, yeah. Yeah, and I would definitely encourage folks who are interested in CBI and violence prevention programs to check out community justice at cjactionfund.org. There's definitely lots of ways to get involved and to make those connections with your communities, especially those Black and Brown communities who are adversely affected by gun violence at a higher rate, especially everyday gun violence. But we can definitely all work together to try to get to the bottom of it and really break the cycle of violence at its fundamental roots. So definitely encourage you guys to stop by and check it out.
Well, Nicole, Christina, I really appreciate both of you. I know this is a really busy time with just a couple of weeks left in the legislative session. So thanks for taking some of the time. I wish we didn't have to have this conversation, but I'm grateful that both of you are doing the work to help prevent future violence. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Texas Impact is a wonderful partner. So I also want to just do a plug for that. Just an incredible partner. We've worked together closely this session, and I'm very grateful.
Yes, I agree with Nicole.
Thank you.
You guys have been there for us every step of the way, and especially being so supportive for all of our survivors and grieving families. And so we are forever grateful.
Thank y'all. I'd like to thank Christina and Nicole for the time, especially during the closing weeks of legislative session, and I also want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and are better prepared for the work communities still need to do to address gun violence. As we wrap up, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast and are sharing it with your friends and congregations, and go to texasimpact.org for other ways you can get involved during the legislative session. While you're there, make sure that you and your congregation sign up to be members of Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. We look forward to resourcing your advocacy, and I'm happy to try my best to answer your questions, so feel free to reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode, so remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.